Hello everyone, my name is Fujii Genki. I am a Japanese journalist and author. Have you heard of the controversy over comfort women? Koreans claim that during World War II, the Japanese government authorities abducted Korean and Asian women and forced them to become comfort women, and that comfort women were sex slaves for the Japanese troops. Allegedly, the number of comfort women was estimated to be at most 200,000. If it's true, certainly it's an atrocity. If you treasure human rights, please listen to my words carefully. If you think history should be written based on facts, facts only, not by propaganda or prejudice, please hear me out. I would like to talk about the naked truth without a fig leaf. On this issue, I conducted a thorough research and I reached some conclusions. I will present you first of all the conclusions first, then I will show you evidence to support my conclusions. Here is the crux of the matter. There are 7 points. First point, there were brothels or prostitution houses for the Japanese troops. Those brothels or prostitution houses were called comfort stations. Women working there were called comfort women. Needless to say, prostitution was legal in those days. Second, comfort women were not sex slaves. They were professional prostitutes. This is the bottom line. Comfort women were professional prostitutes. They were paid for their service, sometimes quite well paid. The third point, the Japanese military and government authorities were never involved in recruitment of comfort women. Recruitment of any kind. None of the comfort women was forcibly recruited by the Japanese authorities. There is no objective evidence at all to prove forcible recruitment of comfort women. No evidence at all. Fourth point, with regard to the number of comfort women, there were at most 20,000, not 200,000. The estimated number of comfort women is somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000. Approximately 40% of comfort women were Japanese. 20% were Koreans. So Japanese comfort women outnumbered comfort women of other nationalities. The fifth point, comfort stations were run by private businessmen. The owners, managers of comfort stations were Japanese, sometimes Koreans, Chinese, or others. Sixth point, many comfort women came to comfort stations by their own will. Some were sold to prostitution brokers by their parents. In those days, poor parents received money in advance in exchange for the long-term labor contract of their daughters. This kind of labor contract was legal in those days. Many young women had to become prostitutes under this kind of contract. A few were deceived by evil prostitution brokers. As for Korean comfort women, Korean prostitution brokers deceived them. Those brokers conned young Korean women in order to procure new prostitutes. These women certainly deserve sympathy. The seventh point is that Koreans tried to convince the people of the world that Japanese military abducted innocent Korean and Asian women and forced them to become sex slaves for the Japanese troops. Such accusation has no ground at all. This kind of accusation is nothing but fabrication. Complete fabrication. It is international black propaganda to blame Japan for coercive recruitment of comfort women. It's a false charge. It's a frame-up. Now I will show you evidence and facts to support my observations. First, findings by the U.S. Army. This is the controversy concerning the Japanese military, so you may not like to listen to Japanese. I understand your suspicion. You need more objective evidence, right? So let's listen to what the American military is saying. Here is one U.S. government official document. This. In August 1944, the U.S. troops captured 20 comfort women 20 Korean comfort women and 2 Japanese civilians at Mitkine in Burma, or today's Myanmar. The psychological warfare team attached to U.S. Army interviewed these Korean comfort women. The official title of this document is United States Office of War Information, Psychological Warfare Team attached to U.S. Army Forces India-Burma Theater, APO 689. This is the document's official title. The report states as follows, I quote, first, very important point, first, a comfort girl, this document says, a comfort girl is nothing more than a prostitute or a professional camp follower attached to the Japanese army for the benefits of the Japanese soldiers. Should I repeat? A comfort girl is nothing more than a prostitute or a professional camp follower. This is what U.S. Army discovered. They interviewed 20 Korean comfort women, and this document clearly states that comfort women were not sex slaves, they were prostitutes. This is the truth. At that time, 1944, Japan was an adversary of the United States. 2 countries were at war, as you know. The U.S. Army had every reason to condemn Japan, so you can rely on these words. You can trust objectivity of this report. Again, the document reads as follows, I quote, the housemaster received 50 to 60% of the girl's gross earnings depending on how much of a debt each girl had incurred when she signed her contract. This meant that in an average month a girl would gross about 1,500 yen. She turned over 750 to the master. So this document says, on average, a Korean comfort woman earned 1,500 yen monthly. She gained half of it, 750 yen for herself. Please note that monthly salary of a Japanese army sergeant was just 30 yen at that time. In 1943, army sergeant monthly salary was just 30 yen. That is 1/25th of earning over income over comfort women. Again, let me quote. In the latter part of 1943, the Japanese army issued orders that certain girls who had paid their debt could return home. Some of the girls were thus allowed to return to Korea, unquote. According to this document, the comfort women could go to a nearby town for shopping. Occasionally, they could enjoy recreation and picnic. They could refuse soldiers they didn't like. Obviously, they were not sex slaves. Let me quote another paragraph. Quote, the interrogations further show that the health of these girls was good. They were well supplied with all types of contraceptives, and often soldiers would bring their own, which had been supplied by the army. They were well trained in looking after both themselves and the customers in the matter of hygiene. A regular Japanese army doctor visited the houses once a week, and any girl found diseased was given treatment, secluded, and eventually sent to a hospital, unquote. In fact, comfort women were rather well protected than prostitutes of private brothels. Army doctor's visit is one good example. The Japanese army was supervising comfort stations, yes, in order to improve welfare of comfort women. Therefore, many prostitutes preferred comfort stations to private brothels. Testimonies of former comfort women. Now, let's listen to the voice of former comfort women. Their words are most important, right? So, let's look at the testimonies of 4 Korean former comfort women. The first person is Ms. Lee Young-soo. This lady. The U.S. House of Representatives held a public hearing on the comfort women issue on February 15th, year 2007. Ms. Lee testified as follows. Let me quote important parts of her testimony. Ms. Lee Young-soo testified as follows. I quote, I was born in 1928 in the Korean city of Daegu. My family was poor and 9 of us lived in a single small house. My parents, my grandmother, my 5 brothers, and myself. I only had 1 year of formal education and spent most of my childhood caring for my younger brothers and doing household chores so my father and mother could work outside our home to support the family. Quote, in the autumn of 1944, when I was 16 years old, my friend Kim Pan-san and I were collecting shellfish at the riverside when we noticed an elderly man and a Japanese man looking down at us from the hillside. The older man pointed at us with his finger, and the Japanese man started to walk towards us. The older man disappeared, and the Japanese beckoned to us to follow him. I was scared and ran away, not caring about what happened to my friend. A few days later, Pan-san knocked on my window early in the morning and whispered to me to follow her quietly. I tiptoed out of the house after her. I left without telling my mother. I was wearing a dark skirt, a long cotton blouse buttoned up at the front, and slippers on my feet. I followed my friend until we met the same man who had tried to approach us on the riverbank. He looked as if he was in his late 30s, and he wore a sort of People's Army uniform with a combat cap. Altogether, there were 5 girls with him, including myself. Unquote. According to her testimony, Ms. E and other young women were taken to Pyongyang, a Korean city, then to Dalian, a Chinese city. Lee Yong-soo begs the man to let her go home, but he refuses. They boarded a ship at Dalian. The ship traveled through Shanghai, then arrived at Taiwan. The man who accompanied those Korean women turned out to be the proprietor of a comfort station, where Ms. E had to work as a prostitute. In her testimony, amazingly, Ms. E never said she was abducted or forcibly taken by the Japanese military. In her testimony, she referred to the guy who was wearing a sort of Chinese People's Army uniform with a combat cap. This kind of suit is often called Mao's jacket in English, but this kind of suit was called kokumin-fuku in Japan during war days. Kokumin-fuku means suit for nationals. Kokumin-fuku was like a uniform for male civilians, not of soldiers. Male adults were recommended to wear that kind of suit. So the guy she was referring to, the guy who accompanied her, was not a soldier. Ms. E left her home by her own will. By her own will, she left home. This is what she said. This is the most important part. She did so probably to escape from poverty, but she was deceived by prostitution brokers. That was very unfortunate. Ms. E Yong-soo never said that she was abducted by Japanese military against her will. Ms. E Yong-soo spoke up in many public places, and she was interviewed by media. I know at least 10 occasions, 10 cases,